anything which starts from somebody else is going to make me free is going to end you up with authoritarianism. But the bright side of that is you can see through that. You can understand that as soon as somebody puts that abstraction or that leader in front of you, you're being guided towards an authoritarian situation. And it's a very simple, like if you seriously believe in freedom, it's very simple to say, what do I actually care about? What is actually good for me? And then move on from there.
Hello, and welcome to the PoliticsGirl podcast. I'm your host, Lee McGowan. Let's get into it. As today's guest, Timothy Snyder, argues, freedom is the great American commitment, but we've lost sight of what it means. In his new book, On Freedom, the New York Times bestselling author and Yale historian digs into the concept of freedom, what it is, how it's been misunderstood, and why upholding it is our only chance for survival. I'm having this conversation with Mr. Snyder today for obvious reasons, because clearly American democracy is in crisis, and as we watch the rise of authoritarians around the world and the rise of authoritarianism wannabes here at home, it's very important we reflect on what is truly happening and what it is we need to protect. So without further ado, please welcome my guest, world's leading historian, Yale professor, and award-winning author Timothy Snyder. Welcome, Tim.
Glad to be with you.
Well, thank you for coming. I have been referencing your work for years. In fact, I referenced you in my new book, A Return to Common Sense, which just joined your book on freedom on the New York Times bestseller list, albeit a bit further down than yours, but we are both there, kind of compatriots in this fight for freedom.
Congratulations.
Thank you. You too. Now, you've been called the leading interpreter of our dark times. So before we get into On Freedom, do you mind if we take a moment to do a little bit of background?
Sure, of course.
Great. So your book on tyranny suggests that the founding fathers tried to protect us from the threat that they knew, namely the tyranny that overcame ancient democracies. But today, the political order faces a new threat, not unlike the totalitarians we've seen in other places in the 20th century. And as you point out, Americans aren't any smarter or wiser than our European nations that fell to fascism or to Nazism or to communism. The only hope is that we're smart enough to learn from previous countries' experience. So do you think that the majority of America is smart enough to learn from history, or are we, as Winston Churchill said, doomed to repeat it?
That's on us. We're certainly smart enough to learn from history, but I would say we don't really have any other choice. Like what the founding fathers had was a knowledge of what went wrong in Greece and Rome. And some of those things are pretty familiar, actually, like oligarchy, concentration of wealth, propaganda. Those are problems also now. And what we have that the founding fathers didn't have is knowledge of the 240 or so years of problems that we've had since our country began. If we drop all of that, and if we pretend that we're just starting fresh, then we're just sliding on the ice, because the past is what gives us traction. The past is what gives us a chance to correct ourselves. And democracy is all about humble self-correction. It's about knowing that there's no tyrant who's perfect. There's nobody who knows everything, but that we all have a chance to learn from the things that came before. So I like to think that the founding fathers left us that as a legacy. It's not that they were perfect. It's that they knew that they weren't, and that they were learning from the past, and they were going to give us instruments. And with those instruments, we could keep on getting better if we want to learn.
Yeah. I actually say that in my book. I say that the founding fathers were not perfect, but they were products of their time, and they realized that things would change. And it's one of the reasons they gave us the amendments, because they knew that they were writing something within the confines of their time, and things would carry on after that. Now, people get very bent out of shape when you make the comparison between, say, MAGA and Nazis, or Trump and Hitler, or even if you mention fascism at all. But looking around America, I'm not exactly sure how you can miss it right now. I mean, lately it seems like we're checking every box in the warning sign of fascism from the Holocaust Museum. And I'm thinking particularly of things like powerful nationalism with the America First movement, and disdain for human rights with women dying of, preventable pregnancy complications thanks to Republican abortion laws, the identification of enemies as a unifying cause to rally around, which of course we see with the vilification of Democrats and liberals, anything woke, and of course right now immigrants, and then rampant sexism, right? With people accusing Kamala Harris of sleeping her way to the top or using witchcraft to win the debate. It just feels like checkmark after checkmark from that rise of fascism list. What are your thoughts on that as a historian, but also as someone who studies tyranny?
Yeah, I mean, first on the comparison, I would just say if the comparison wasn't true, it wouldn't be painful and people wouldn't get upset by it. And I think for those of us who aren't upset by it, but just annoyed by it, it's pretty important not to be annoyed, because if you're not willing to look at the past and take it seriously, then you can't notice the threats. And so if you're not MAGA yourself, but you just think, well, Americans are definitely better than this because we're Americans, you're making a mistake. And it's a mistake which is going to lead towards authoritarianism, because the moment that you think, well, we're not that bad, you're imagining that there's somebody out there who's going to do the work for you, or there's some institution who's going to save the system. And there isn't. There's nobody except you. There are no institutions except for the life that we put into them. So it's pretty important, even if the comparisons cause a little friction, to say, okay, we're not better than anybody else, except insofar as we make ourselves better than anybody else and do the right thing these next 4 weeks or 4 months or 4 years or 40 years, whatever it might be. So being able to deal with the comparisons, I think, is kind of a test of whether you're a free person or not. You don't have to agree with every aspect of a comparison to say, well, wait a minute, I could learn something from the past. I could do better. This is really on me. Aside from, I mean, on the checklist, like your checklist was marvelous. There's just a whole lot to add. I would just add the cult of a leader. And you've already said this, but I'll put it in a slightly different way. Beginning politics from the choice of an enemy, rather than beginning politics from reality or from a view about what you can make better. And again, you've already suggested this, but choosing to live in unreality. So the big lie that Trump won the last election is opens the way to other big, medium-sized, and small lies, allowing people to live in a story which is created by their chosen leader, rather than having to engage with difficult facts or with fellow citizens. All of that, plus the first failed coup attempt. I mean, which is kind of a practical
a glaring sign. Yeah, no, I mean, I look at it right now and it seems crazy. Like, you're talking about the big lie leading to little lies. Like, the other warning signs, if people aren't aware of them, are things like controlling the mass media, which of course we see happening with the right-wing echo chamber of Fox News and its counterparts, but also what Elon Musk is doing with X, which is becoming increasingly more dangerous and amped up every day. This idea of religion being intertwined with government, which of course is the entire purpose of the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, which is full-on blatant vocal Christian nationalism. And then of course there's that obsession with crime and punishment, right? Who is your enemies, and locking up political rivals and shutting down private companies like Google that allowed for criticism of Trump. And I don't think we can miss the cronyism, right? And the corruption of the entire Trump organization, which is now filled with family members and loyalists, and how they want to fill the entire government with that. You purge people that aren't full loyalists and bring them in. I mean, it seems so obvious. And I think what you're saying is we have to deal with the comparison. We have to say these are all lining up, and we do ourselves a disservice to pretend it's not happening.
That's true. And then you have to take the next step as well and give the other side credit for having a coherent view of the world. It may be a wrong, evil view of the world, but it is a view of the world. And when we just say, like, well, they've gotten some things wrong, or, it's a road bump or whatever, then we're also doing ourselves a disservice. They have a view of the world, and the things that you list for them, they're not deficiencies or problems. They're parts of a larger way of seeing things. So, for example, the cronyism and the fascism work together. You mentioned Project 2025. If you fire 40,000 American civil servants and you replace them with thoroughly incompetent people who can be trusted on to be reliable to you, the federal government isn't going to work anymore. And when the federal government doesn't work anymore, the only way to get things done is by having a friend who's inside the presidential administration. And what does that do? Well, it favors the idea that only the big guy, only the leader can get things done, right? Which is a fascist idea. And meanwhile, because the federal government isn't working, we're going to be set against each other. We're not going to be getting our social security checks. Things aren't going to work. The roads are going to break down. And so we're going to be fighting each other. And then the fascist side is very happy about that, because that's what we're supposed to be doing. And then they will spin out stories like the one about Springfield or whatever, which will get us to fight one another. And that's how they're going to govern. So these various pieces for them fit together. It's not just an absence of democracy or an attack on the Constitution. It's the presence of an alternative model, which in their minds is entirely real and unfortunately is possible if we don't recognize it.
It is entirely possible. I mean, I often give credit to the right for having far better long-term planning than the left does. That they looked at something like Roe in 1973 and they made a long-term plan to overturn it, and then they got it accomplished. That the Heritage Foundation didn't just start with Project 2025. They have been working with Republican administrations for decades to try and get to where we are now. I mean, the thing that I think of all the time is that I know that MAGA would say that all the things I pointed out, cronyism and corruption and these kind of things, would be things that the Democrats are doing, maybe without the sexism part. So how do you counter that when you feel like you're living in the upside down, when there's so much projection from the right onto the left? They're the ones doing it. They're the ones that are corrupt. Biden is the one that's corrupt with Ukraine, this kind of thing, where I feel sometimes like we're on our head and what's happening here, they are saying is happening over here.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tactic that you can't mirror image back on the mirror imaging people. What you have to do is take a lateral step and start with something that you're constructively doing. So with the example of Ukraine, you can say, well, in fact, what we're doing is we're funding American factories and creating American jobs. And by the way, the fact that Ukraine is holding off the Russians means that good things 1, 2, 3, and 4 are happening. You can't get stuck in the kind of back and forth because it's just an algorithm. Whatever they're doing, they say you're doing, and some of their people actually believe it. And so you kind of have to pivot and tell a different positive story, I think. And you have to know that story, and you have to believe in that story, and you have to be patient with that story, because ultimately what that story represents is a different view, which is that politics isn't all about criticizing and bringing people down. Politics is also about showing what we can do together. So yeah, it's very easy to get depressed because they have no attachment whatsoever to what's true, and they take pleasure in making you feel bad about the good things that you're doing. Ukraine is a very good example of that as well. And so you have to find a way to pivot and talk about it in a different way. Because remember, like, the people, you know this better than me, but like the people who come to you with stuff like that, they are themselves in a psychological trap, which depends on getting you annoyed and coming back at them so that they can feel like they were justified in the first place. And so there has to be some kind of pivot, like there has to be a judo move or a dance move or something else where they end up at least a little bit unsettled and not centered anymore, and maybe not quite comfortable in that psychological habit of back and forth.
Right. It is tough, though. I mean, I watched Trump recently call Kamala Harris a radical left-wing communist Marxist fascist. And I was like, boy, that's a lot of terms that don't go together. But people believe him, right? They just throw the terms around willy-nilly, and then it's hard to kind of get out from under that mess.
Yeah, it's hard, but it's normal. I mean, this is what this feels like. You know, this is what people are dealing with this all around the world. People have had to deal with this for decades. This is what it feels like when you're facing people who know how to use words, right? So Trump is very talented. Trump is very charismatic. Trump has a worldview. Trump is highly motivated. He wants to die in bed in the White House. That's an understandable motivation. In order to get there, he's going to do these things. And we have to, on the one side, be tough ourselves. And I think Kamala Harris is actually doing a pretty good job of this. One has to be able to present what he presents as strength as weakness, which in many ways it is. One has to show that if somebody bluffs all the time, what they're going to do is end up creating an impotent country and an impotent political system, which is in fact what will happen with Trump advance. And at the same time, one has to be able to say, this is what is good about us. Right? This is what is good. Like, you have to be able to shield, you have to have a sword, you have to have a shield, but you also have to have a forward move. It always has to end with a forward move, because if it doesn't end with a forward move, then you're not going to feel good at the end of it. And so much of this is about demoralizing you. Trump and Vance have no business being this close to power. Right. The only reason they do is because they generate fear and they demoralize. They make people unsure. They make people lose a step. And so that you have just to make sure that's not happening to you, because however demoralizing and ridiculous, the things they say are, they don't believe those things. They're just there in order to fill like the psychic space of your mind, to slow you down. That's what they're there for. And so don't let them do that. Move in a different direction.
Right. So let me ask you then, if I want to do that, because I do find myself, because I'm so inundated with the news, and I know my audience is as well, that I do end up feeling demoralized sometimes. It does end up feeling like, good God, like we're just fighting this giant uphill battle. I know there's more people who believe in the good of America. I know there's more people who believe in human rights and civil rights and women's rights and workers' rights than there are the alternative. But it still feels like an onslaught. I mean, in March of this year, you read an article for the Philadelphia Inquirer that said voters don't have a clue about how much worse a second Trump term would be. And it was essential that the press cover how authoritarian regimes happen and what it would mean to everyday life for Americans if it happened here. But with that in mind, it's hard not to feel like the press is failing us. I mean, it either is they don't truly understand how authoritarian regimes rise, they think it won't affect them, or they're just completely controlled by their own bottom line. What are your thoughts on that? Because I do wish that there was more people telling us the alternative, the hopeful alternative, the counterbalance. I often only eat a proper meal at dinner, but I find I need something to keep my brain and body functioning better than my morning coffee can offer. The thing is, the older I get, the more intentional I really do try to be about the way I live and eat and take care of my body, which is why I'm such a big Mosh fan. You may have heard of Mosh on Shark Tank. Mosh is a company founded by Maria Shriver and her son Patrick Schwarzenegger with a simple mission: to create a conversation about brain health through food, education, and research. Mosh joined forces with the world's top scientists and functional nutritionists to make something beyond your average protein bar. With 10 delicious flavors, including 3 that are plant-based, each Mosh bar is made with ingredients that support brain health like lion's mane, collagen, and omega-3s. And now Mosh bars come with a new look and formulation, featuring the first and only brand boosted with cognizin, a premium neurotropic that supplies the brain with a patented form of acetylcholine. So, in normal person speak, brain boosters. And here's the best part. Mosh donates a portion of all proceeds from your order to fund gender-based brain health research through the Women's Alzheimer's Movement. 2/3 of all Alzheimer's patients are women, and Mosh is working closely to close that gap between men and women's health research. I'm always going on and on about their lemon and white chocolate flavor because it's my favorite, but you can't go wrong with any of them. So if you want to find ways to give back to others and fuel your body and brain, Mosh bars are the perfect choice for you. Head to moshlife.com/politicsgirl to save 20% off plus free shipping on either their bestseller trial pack or the new plant-based trial pack. That's 20% off plus free shipping on either the bestsellers or plant-based trial pack at moshlife.com/politicsgirl. Thank you, Mosh, for continuing to sponsor the Politics Girl podcast. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but I've been doing a lot more TV lately, and I'm deeply aware of my skin when the makeup artists get their hand on me. I really try not to get caught up in my age, but I do want to keep my skin as healthy as possible as I get older, which is why I'm pleased to tell you about OneSkin. Founded by an all-women's team of scientists, OneSkin is the first and only skin longevity company to target cellular sentience, a key hallmark of aging, with their proprietary OS1 peptide. OS1 is scientifically proven to decrease lines and wrinkles, boost hydration, and help with thinning skin that often comes with age. Using their in-house cutting-edge R&D platform, the scientists at OneSkin were able to measure the effectiveness of age reversal molecules in their lab, and they found that the OS1 peptide reverses the skin's biological age by reducing the number of sentient cells, the ones that stop producing collagen and hyaluronic acid, by 50%. Treating symptoms rather than the root cause of aging has long been the norm in skincare, seeking to provide a temporary reduction to the visible signs of aging rather than addressing the underlying decline in the skin's health. OneSkin, on the other hand, believes the purpose of skincare is not just to improve how we look, but to optimize our skin's biology so that it's more resilient to the aging process. It's next level skincare, and it's the reason they have over 4,000 five-star reviews for their full line of face, body, sun, and travel size products. OneSkin is the world's first skin longevity company. By focusing on the cellular aspects of aging, OneSkin keeps your skin looking and acting younger for longer. Get started today with 15% off using the code PoliticsGirl at oneskin.co. That's 15% off at oneskin.co with the code PoliticsGirl. And after you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support the show and tell them that we sent you. I do wish that there was more people telling us the alternative, the hopeful alternative, the counterbalance.
Well, it's both at the same time, right? I mean, what worries me, it's that it's both darker and brighter at the same time. Like, that's the thing that troubles me. And like, everyone kind of aims for the center, and the center is well, he might win and that, might be pretty bad, or she might win and then we'll see. And like, we'll see is not a description of the world. And what the press is there for, in my, naive, but I think correct view, is to describe the world. And like, we're going to wait and see. And in the meantime, we're going to just kind of bank and we're going to kind of veer and we're kind of make sure we're in the middle. That's not a view of the world, right? Like that's conformism. It's a strategy, but it's not a view of the world. We really did need a lot more reportage of what authoritarian regimes are like, whether that was historical pieces about the South, or whether that was coverage of what happened in Russia in the 90s or whatever it might be, like, because that American imagination is lost.
Even what's going on in Hungary right now.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like we keep using Hungary as this, like, this is the
Yeah.
shining star of what we should be like. And you're like, they are absolutely decimating their judicial system, their media, they're killing LGBTQ people, really.
Well, all their best people have immigrated. They've turned their constitution into a joke. They're poor. They're ruled by an oligarch who steals all the money that comes inside, and he stays in power by serving Russia and China. That is what Trump describes as a positive model, right? That's where Trump wants to take us. And you're absolutely right. There are plenty of examples, contemporary examples, which the Republicans themselves point to, which one could then say, well, if that's what you want, let's describe it. But then on the other side, we're also missing a sense of what is good, of like what is possible, like how things could be much better. We miss a memory of how things turned really quickly in the 30s, how things turned really quickly in good ways in the 60s, a sense that can happen in the US in general, that you can get around a bend and suddenly the space opens up in front of you and you can get a lot of things done really quickly. We're missing that part of it as well. And so like what I'm troubled by is this like everyone kind of hustling towards a middle which doesn't really exist. There isn't really a middle. There are these two worldviews, these two very different sets of possibilities that are in front of us. And it also means that you can focus on how much better things could rapidly become.
Yeah.
Right? Which they could, because everything you've said can be undone. Right. And not only can it be undone, but like there are so many realms of policy where we have so much catching up to do, which could happen.
I completely agree. I mean, so let's turn to your book on freedom, right? Which was published the exact same day as mine. And interestingly, both focus on the dangers to American democracy, but also the importance of freedom. But I think both of them are very hopeful books. And so it thrills me that you think this way because while I focus on how government works in domestic issues so people can understand it and then move through it and then be better stewards of it, you come at it from a wider lens as you've watched the rise of authoritarianism around the world and you point out that it is typical for them to strip people of their rights and institutions of their power and erode these norms that come with democratic governments. But even though you deliberately point out that Americans are less free than they were a decade ago, and you've always written about these warning signs that we need to be vigilant about, here we are, and yet you have a hopeful outlook on it.
Well, I mean, the hopeful outlook partly comes from doing stuff, like you do stuff, I do stuff, you got to do stuff. You have to pick the spots where you can make a difference and then make a difference in those spots. None of us can do the whole thing. But when you do a little bit, then you end up feeling better, and you also end up feeling better about the whole thing. And like that's a very simple thing, and I'm just gonna mention it. Like there's my book, and I'm gonna talk about my book, but there's also my little tiny bits of activism, and my little tiny bits of activism changed my whole atmosphere, right, for me. And I know that this is, and so like in the next 4.5 weeks. It's true in general, but in the next 4.5 weeks, like do your little thing and you're going to feel better about the whole thing, right? That's the main answer. But the philosophical answer is that, and this is what the book is about, is that freedom's about the good things. Like Americans, when we talk about freedom, we're angry, and that's a bad sign, right? But freedom isn't really about what you can't do. Freedom is really about what you can do. It's not really about the barriers. It's really about the possibilities. And when you think about it that way, you do end up being more hopeful because you can start from, okay, we pretty much all agree that freedom is a good thing. So what is freedom? Well, freedom means that you consider some things good. I consider other things good. We need to create a system in which you can realize your values. I can realize my values. What would that system look like? Well, it would probably involve some elections and some laws, but it would also involve structures like healthcare and education and so on, which would allow us to grow up. And this is an important part, allow babies, children to grow up and to become the kinds of people who can be free. And reasoning that way, you can start with this word that we all agree on. You can fill it up as a concept positively. And then you can say, well, actually, a lot of the things that we think about in terms of social justice or equality, which are important things, of course, those things we need to be free, right? And so you can take this concept of freedom, stretch it out, make it more inclusive, make it more progressive, and it kind of points us towards a future. And that, like, writing that book has made me feel better about things, because it's defending is important, but you have to defend in the name of something. And I think that freedom is the right name, but then what is freedom, right? That's the thing I'm trying to get at.
Absolutely. I mean, my book is based around 6 fundamental American principles. The first being America is the land of freedom, because I wanted people to have something to start with as a starting point that we would all agree no matter where we sat on the political spectrum. And I think that your book is about the big picture thinking, much like On Tyranny was, that you argue in this book what you're just talking about now, that this idea of freedom has been distorted, that people are often calling for negative freedom or freedom from things like freedom from oversight or freedom from regulation or freedom from government power, when we really should be fighting for positive freedoms, like the freedom to do things. And you were just talking about it now, but like, is there an expansion on that people could take into their life when they're looking at their freedoms that they could be thinking about as they go into their day?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, the whole thing starts from an idea that freedom is happy, right? Like, so you have your unpredictable little things. I've got my unpredictable little things. We all have, we all have these things that we actually do care about, that we really do like, and we may be a little ashamed to mention them. And freedom is those things that actually make us ourselves. That's what freedom is. It isn't on an everyday basis. It isn't stopping the evil colossus. On an everyday basis, it's becoming yourself with other people. And that's a nice thing. Like, that's a good thing. That's a happy thing. And that's what freedom basically is. And so a free society is one in which we together build institutions that allow us to become our eccentric, interesting, unpredictable, forward-looking selves, right? That's freedom. So freedom's a happy idea. And then we can build little institutions. And if we vote right and win power, we can build bigger institutions, which make that possible for more and more people. And then you get a positive feedback loop where, as we understand freedom more broadly, we're building government better around the idea of freedom. And this is where, like, I think a big apparent American conundrum gets broken, because Americans are trained to think, well, government's the problem. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. And if you think in terms of freedom, you can say, well, what government is for is to create the conditions for freedom. That means that, hey, you know what? Having free kindergarten or free meals at school, it's not only okay, it's liberating, right? Yeah. There's no reason to feel bad about doing things that liberate other people. We should feel good about that. We should be good that our tax dollars can pay for a situation in which more and more of us can be free, and that we can have these lives that are attractive and nice and appealing. So so for me, the everyday life part of it connects to the high political part of it. It's all one thing.
Yeah. And at its heart, I think On Freedom shows us the traps we might fall into, elements that might limit our freedom. And it kind of encourages the reader to picture something better, right? I was actually very happy to see it fell so in line with what I believe, which is that the total destruction of America is not some done deal, right? That we can preserve what we have and make it better, not just for us, but for those that come after us. But to do that, we have to do serious work, and I think that that's an essential point where people have to be sitting here going, what action am I taking? You were talking earlier about action kind of being the antidote to apathy, where people are feeling distressed and they have 4 weeks leading up to the election. It's like, what are you going to do? I promise you the doing part will make you feel better. And then we're talking about freedom. And I think people have forgotten growing up in America that there are so many nations in the world where just, traveling across the border isn't possible. Going where you want to at a certain time wasn't possible. We take so many of our freedoms for granted. And then we hear governments talking about not letting us cross the border or having pregnancy tests to cross the border. And we don't realize how quickly we could devolve. It's an important thing for us to be thinking about.
It cuts, like so many things, it cuts in both directions, though. Like, we also don't really think about what it would be like to be free to walk the streets at night as a woman, or what it would be like to be free to take an 8-week vacation every summer, or what it would be like to be free to raise your kids because there's inexpensive daycare. Or we don't think about those things. But there are countries which are not, which quantitatively are not as wealthy as we are, where people have those freedoms, and our imagination has been pounded down by this notion that freedom is only negative. It's just a matter of the government. And the government is just a barrier, as opposed to freedom being, well, hey, it's actually nice to have vacations, and it's nice to have time with your family. It's nice to have time with your friends. It's nice to have hobbies, and we can build government together, which allows us to do all those things and to be people. So there's the positive part we miss. And then you're right, there's a negative part that we miss too, where we don't think, okay, there's like this the sort of everyday experience of tyranny, which is something like, oh, wait a minute, even though I voted for the right guy, I need to stop talking now because they're going to throw my kid out of school. Or I can't stick my neck out now, even though I voted the right guy, because my neighbor's going to denounce me. Like that stuff that makes life poisonous and dreary. That tyranny isn't just that. It isn't just the big evil guy wearing the black boots in some faraway capital city. It's your neighbors, it's your schools, it's changing the whole way you live to become a dreary, frightened, uninteresting person forever. Right? Who is spreading the drear and the lack of interest and the boredom to other people, that's you now, and that's you indefinitely because you didn't see what was coming. We lack that imagination as well. So but I just want to emphasize there's a good side of this too, right? That like, if we can do the conceptual work to kind of break freedom out of these restraints, then we can imagine and actually make an America which is much better.
My window treatments need a major upgrade, but let's be honest, I need someone to help me with it. Which is why I'm happy there's a better way to buy blinds, shades, shutters, and drapery, and it's called 3-Day Blinds. 3-Day Blinds are the leading manufacturer of custom window treatments in the US, and right now they're running a buy one, get one 50% off deal. We can shop for almost anything at home, so why not blinds? 3-Day Blinds has local, professionally trained design consultants who have an average of 10 plus years of experience to provide you with expert guidance on the right blinds from the comfort of your own home. Just set up an appointment and you will get a free, no obligation quote the same day. Check out 3-Day Blinds on Instagram. They've got some great looks. Maybe it's 2024 and you're thinking, my house is smart, why aren't my blinds? Well, they can be. 3-Day Blinds can hook you up with blinds that connect with your smart house. Alexa, open blinds. Or if that's not up your alley, because it's not up mine and it freaks me out, get motorized blinds or roller shades or Roman shades. No matter your unique need, from room darkening to child safety, with 3-Day Blinds you get to choose from thousands of options that fit any budget and style, with actual samples that won't leave you guessing about what they're going to look like. As I said, right now you can get 3-Day Blinds, buy one, get one 50% off deal on custom blinds, shades, shutters, and drapery. For a free, no charge, no obligation consultation, just head to 3dayblinds.com/politicsgirl. That's buy one, get one 50% off when you head to 3dayblinds.com/politicsgirl. One last time, that is the number 3, DAY, blinds.com/politicsgirl. Now listen, I know I've been talking a lot about my neighbor's cats lately, but as you may or may not know, I actually have a dog. A beautiful, wonderful golden doodle named Chips, who is an absolute dream boy. I think it would be fair to say that I'm close to being obsessed with my dog, and the feeling is mutual. He is my shadow, he goes everywhere with me, and I'm not kidding when I tell you that he loves Sundays for dogs. I had heard great things about Sundays, but my boy's a picky eater, so I wasn't sure he would take to it. And often when he refuses to eat anything else now, Sundays is what he'll have. Sundays for Dogs is a fresh dog food made from a short list of human-grade ingredients, co-founded by a practicing veterinarian who tests and formulates every version of each recipe. Sundays contains 90% meat, 10% superfoods, and 0% synthetic nutrients or artificial ingredients. And unlike other fresh dog food, Sundays doesn't require refrigeration or preparation because of their air drying process, so you can just pour and serve. I go back and forth between the beef and the chicken because, like us, Chips gets bored if you offer him the same food every day. So, if you or your dog want to try Sundays for Dogs, go to sundaysfordogs.com/politicsgirl to get 40% off your first order. That's sundaysfordogs.com/politicsgirl, or use the code politicsgirl at checkout for 40% off. Because I'm sure your dog is just as special to you as my dog is to me, and I would never steer you wrong when it comes to our doggos. sundaysfordogs.com/politicsgirl.
If we can do the conceptual work to kind of break freedom out of these restraints, then we can imagine and actually make an America which is much better.
Yeah. And I think that's what sort of the democratic socialists often talk about in our government, that talk about nations like Denmark and Sweden and those nations that, like you said, might be less rich than America, but they have a far richer life, where you grow up and you say, I know that my husband and I only had one child, A, because I was sick, but B, even when we were offered a surrogate, we were like, we can't afford it. The idea that you could have the freedom to have more children because your education was taken care of, because you had a childhood tax credit, because you weren't going to go destitute doing that. The freedom to know your kids got a good education, the freedom that you could have, like you said, a vacation. I mean, when you said that, I was like, what? Like, what are we, European? But like, it would be great, right? Like, every time I go to Europe, I see these people sitting by the Seine or, just like with their bottle of wine after 6 p.m., they're all off work. They're like, they have a life that belongs to them. And that itself is a freedom that I think Americans often don't think of as we eat and drink in our car and go from place to place and sit at our desk and work. I think we have forgotten there is a different way to live.
Yeah, that's the word, life, right? Like freedom begins from life. Like you're a human, you get the things you like. Maybe you like, being by the river in Paris. Maybe you like drinking wine. Maybe that's you. And if that's you, then you should have the time to do that, right? And the funny thing about that is that there's nothing that's actually lost, because the French are more productive in the workplace than we are, because they're not always there. And the same is true for the Scandinavians. They have a lot more vacation time and they work less and they get more done. Right. So you're not actually losing anything. We've got ourselves bullied into this position of thinking we have to work all the time because it's the market that's free, not us. But we're the ones who have to be free. And if we are free, we'll actually be happier in the workplace and get more stuff done as a result. There's nothing lost here.
And that's the imagination you're talking about, that we've sort of lost the imagination to see that it could be a different way, and then to ask for governments that might offer that to us. A writer I admire, Anne Applebaum, who wrote the article for The Atlantic, Autocracy, Inc., which I ended up doing a whole podcast on because it was fascinating, and now she's written a book on it. She said that everyone who cares about freedom, what it means, what it'll take to preserve it, should be reading your book on freedom. What were you hoping people would take from it as you were writing it?
Well, first, when you mentioned Anne, I can't help but saying that, and you talked earlier about being overwhelmed by information. When I look at that work that Anne Applebaum has done in the last decade or so, I would say, if you didn't read anything else and you just read everything Anne wrote, you would have a much clearer picture of what has happened to the US and the world. Like if you just dropped all the junk and just only read Anne Applebaum stuff, you would be so much better informed.
Could not agree more. She is absolutely spectacular.
She's been killing it for a decade. I want people to think, okay, there's a conservative thing I want people to think, which is that there is a right and wrong. Like there's a right and wrong answer about what freedom is. And there's an American thing I want people to take away that they probably already had, which is that freedom is the big idea. It's the big idea. And then the new thing that I want people to take away from the book is that freedom is bigger and richer and more interesting than we think. And if we get it right, we can be more joyous, more productive. This country can take a turn, and that there are much better things around the corner. But I do honestly think that we have to get the ideas right first. This I sincerely believe, and this is why I think there had to be a philosophy book, which is what this is. We can't just defend the things. We have to know what the things are. And so I'm trying, honestly, step by step, piece by piece, to lay this out, what freedom actually is. Because I sincerely think if we get that right, we're not only energized, but we're not only more energized, but we're happier, because we can see on the basis of what we can help this country make a turn.
Yeah. I mean, you told Rachel Maddow that when you had written your book on tyranny, you were trying to give people advice on how to preserve what we have, but you realized you hadn't defined the alternative to tyranny. So you didn't want to just be warning people of what we shouldn't have, but perhaps defining what we should, which is how you got to the concept of On Freedom. And as you said, no one else can give you freedom. The moment you think it comes from outside or from the past or from someone else, you're basically asking for authoritarianism. Can you just expand on that just for me?
Sure. No, thank you. Because that's a really tempting way to go, to think, well, there were the founding fathers, which, as you and I agree, they were rebels in their time, as Frederick Douglass put it, which means, for me, that means you should, if you admire them, then you should be a rebel in your own time. That's the way to go. You can think, oh, well, history is going to bring us freedom. No, it's not. You can think that the market's going to bring you freedom. It isn't. The moment you think about the market being free, you create this strange situation, which is American, unfortunately, where you have duties to the market. Like suddenly it's my duty not to intervene in the market. right? Which is crazy. The markets are institutions which we should try to direct towards making us more free. So the moment you make that mental step of like anything else is going to make you free, you're not being a free person, because freedom is about the things you think are good. You have to start from there. What do I think is good? How can I bring that into the world? And a land of the free would be a place, to cite your chapter, a land of the free would be a place where we have the institutions and the habits which make that possible. So it has to start with an attitude, but then it ends with institutions. But any attitude about like, the fascist version, the leader's going to make me free, the libertarian version, the market's going to make me free, anything which starts from somebody else is going to make me free is going to end you up with authoritarianism. But the bright side of that is you can see through that. You can understand that as soon as somebody puts that abstraction or that leader in front of you, you're being guided towards an authoritarian situation. And it's a very simple, like if you seriously believe in freedom, it's very simple to say, what do I actually care about? What is actually good for me? And then move on from there.
Yeah. I think that is where it gets complicated, because I look at the right wing of America and how they have made this solid attempt to take the concept of freedom as their own. But a lot of it is the negative part that you're talking about. They tried to take the flag, they tried to take the word patriot, but I feel like the Democrats are trying to make a solid push to take the idea of freedom back. And it's in a much more positive freedom way. What you can do, how you can be free, how you can start a business, where you can, raise your family, if you can afford housing, those kind of positive freedoms. Are you seeing that here?
Yeah. I mean, I think interestingly, just to like add a little bit to your premise, I think Trump and Vance are actually dropping freedom. They like it's not just like for a while it was warped, and I think we've now actually reached the point where they're basically dropping it. Like they're not even really pretending very hard that an America under them would be anything like a land of the free. But yeah, I mean, when we treat freedom as negative, right? Freedom is always the government against us. Then it's a small pivot to freedom is us against us. And so then you get this notion of freedom, which is very angry. So other people are making me unfree. And so I don't have to think about who I am. I just know I'm against them, which is how Vance and Trump practice politics. And again, one has to remember that they're smart and they know what they're doing, right? And so you start from this notion of negative freedom and you end up with this fascist us against them. What I'm observing, I'm just observing this. What I'm observing is that Harris and Walz, like what they started by doing was trying to take negative freedom away from the Republicans. They started by saying, well, actually, the Republicans are going to put government on your back or in your bodies, and we're the ones who aren't going to do that. So we're the ones who can give you freedom from, which is okay. Freedom from is okay. It's just that it's a first step towards freedom too. The reason why we care about freedom from is because we're people, right? The barrier matters because it holds back a person. Once they start talking about freedom, unlike the Republicans who absolutely can't do this because of oligarchy, et cetera, once they start talking about freedom, they can shift to freedom too. They can say, oh, wait a minute, healthcare isn't just freedom from the lack of healthcare. It's freedom to have healthcare. And then you can start thinking, okay, well, education, good schools, these aren't just things that we ought to have because it's fair. These are things we ought to have because they spread freedom, right? And so they've been moving in that direction. And I do find that very encouraging, not only because it's right, but because I think it's effective. I think Americans are right to think about freedom. We've just been thinking about it in the wrong way. And so here we have not just a kind of political capture of a term. I think we also have a shift towards the correct and useful meaning of the term, which is that we can liberate ourselves. We can actually live bigger, fuller, more interesting lives if we work together to create the conditions for that.
Right. If you had to give final thoughts to the audience on what you believe could happen if we started making the right decisions starting in November, how do you see America playing out in the future in your mind if we were to do that with this positive freedom mantle?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that, because that's the whole arc of the book. I define freedom. I end up with government. There's some forms along the way, which I think are necessary. But I think we could live longer. I think we could have more time with our friends. I think we could have more time with our families. I think we could enjoy work more. I think we could have more predictability in the outside, which allows for unpredictability in the inside. If we're less worried about health and mortality and education, then we have more room to be the quirky, interesting people we are. I mean, the point of the book is that freedom and government actually work together. If you understand freedom correctly, it helps you to find what kind of government you should have. That's a government which creates the conditions for freedom. And if you do that, then you have more people who are more free and are thinking more in terms of freedom. And then you get into this positive feedback where the country makes a turn and keeps going and keeps broadening. I think this is a matter of survival. politically. I think that we could lose the constitutional order we have. I think we haven't talked about this, but I think if these guys win, we're going to turn the corner in a bad way on global warming, and it's going to be very, very, very hard to ever come back. But so it's a matter of survival in a lot of different ways. But it's a matter of turning the corner towards an order where we can take a deep breath, where government does things for us that makes sense, and where we've made sense of government in terms of freedom. So that's what government's for. It's not for anything else. Government is there to make us free. And once we see that, then a whole lot of things that make us tense, a whole lot of apparent contradictions fall away, and we have a clear set of notions of what we need to do going forwards.
Yeah. It's amazing, actually, how similar the breakdown of both of our books are, because we're both clearly seeing the world in a it could be better way. We've both set up worlds in which we're saying, here's a lens in which to look through and try and consider what could be rather than what just is, instead of being mired in the fear of what's happening right now. But I think what you're saying, too, is like this concept of turning the corner, that we forget that we turned the corner in the 60s. We forget that we turned the corner and things can open up and be better. And we should look to that. We should work to that. We should make action towards that. Do you think that America is on the track or has the ability or likelihood to choose correctly in November so that we can potentially turn the corner? I'd love to have your thought.
I do. But I think it, in a way, it kind of re-encapsulates the whole conversation.
Right.
If everybody does the little things that we need to do, then yes. If we just worry, then no. But if the people who think the right things, if we all do a little thing between now and then, it's going to be okay.
Well, that's good. Let's leave it on that. I want to thank you so much for joining us today, Tim. And the biggest congratulations on your best-selling book. Please tell people how they can buy On Freedom and continue to follow your work in these tenuous times.
Well, you can buy it. You can buy it anywhere. I prefer independent bookstores. Of course, it's on Amazon, and I'm going to be touring with the book in the Midwest and the Great Plains in October, because that's where I want to be. And where that tour will be held is on my Substack. So thank you.
Thank you. And we really will hope we'll have you back post-election to talk about where to go from here and how to best turn the corner.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So that was Timothy Snyder reminding us to not be demoralized, that freedom is a happy thing, that our imaginations have pounded the idea of freedom down, and although there is a right and a wrong, freedom is the big idea we should be working towards. That we really could, if we chose correctly, make a positive turn and open this country and our lives to the good things. We can't forget the past. The past is what gives us traction and keeps us humble as we self-correct. And we can't continue to live in unreality, where big lies give room to endless small ones. So we have to use our sword and our shield, but continue to move forward. We'll see how it goes is not a plan, and hope comes from action. Action is what we need right now. So I want to thank Tim for joining us today, and you for caring enough about democracy to be here. Now go out and do something in these last few weeks before the election. At this point, it really does come down to us. Until next week, PG out. The Politics Girl podcast is written and performed by me, Lee McGowan, in partnership with the Meidas Media Network, and produced and edited by Happy Warrior Entertainment. All rights reserved.